What is going on, everybody? Hope you all had a good night. Time for another baseball slate with some better pitching options to consider. 13 games. Hopefully, Adam and I won't have total egg on our face because we won't have to just totally shit on Zach Greinke again today. So hope you guys are doing well. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're sponsored by Prize Picks today. Adam, you and I have some crow to eat. I assume I have to pull up chat. I assume Sean V is in there taking victory laps because he said that he was going to play Zach Greinke because he had a good game against the Angels last August. And what do you know? He went ahead and he pitched well against him again.
Yeah, he pitched well. Whatever. I don't really care. Like you still didn't need him to win, but yeah, he pitched well. Greinke obviously highlighted exactly how horrible the Angels are. If you were watching the game, I kind of accepted that Greinke was going to have a monster start. And I think it was the first inning when he threw a curveball that at no point looked like a strike. It bounced in front of the plate and Rengifo swung over it for strike three. I was just like, okay, these guys are just literally incapable of hitting. But yeah, he pitched well.
Yep, he ended up having a solid start. It's not like he was totally necessary, but obviously in hindsight, he was better than some of the guys I played. I was really excited about Sean Manaea being low owned. I was like, he should be higher owned. And then he just totally got his ass kicked by the Detroit Tigers of all teams. But on to another slate, and we've got a lot of good pitching options today and some of my favorite pitchers. And then in particular, in the first game of the slate here, we got my guy Spencer Strider on the mound. This is how much respect Spencer Strider is now getting from books. We've got the Braves on the road against the Phillies. Aaron Nola is the starting pitcher for the Phillies. And the Braves are favored in this game with Strider on the mound. His numbers this year, 2.78 expected ERA, 37.9% K rate. Aaron Nola, 2.72 expected ERA, 28.1% K rate. These are two of the better pitchers that we have in the National League. How do you like them as plays for this slate?
I mean, I think that they're both really good. So I think that they both look solid here. The matchup is decent. The matchup for both guys is decent. Philadelphia is banged up a bit. Strider obviously is just insanely good. 37.4% strikeout percentage, 2.43 xFIP as a starter this year, well below 1 home run per 9 innings allowed. Nola striking out 28% of hitters, only walking 3%, which is a crazy low walk percentage, 2.95 xFIP for him. The Braves lineup's a bit more dangerous than the Philadelphia lineup, but there are also plenty of strikeouts there. So both of these guys to me look very good here.
Yeah, they are the two most popular pitchers right now on DK, which is a little bit surprising to me because we have Shane McClanahan pitching against the Baltimore Orioles. But right now, 38% ownership going to Nola. We've got 32% going to Strider over on DK for FanDuel purposes. Nola, crazy popular on FanDuel, 29% ownership on a single pitcher slate. That seems pretty high to me. And then Strider, 16.2%, the second most popular pitcher. But the way I'm looking at this right now, I just think Strider's underpriced on DK, $8,700. If I was to make lineups right now, I'm pretty sure he would be either my most or second most rostered pitcher, with McClanahan also being in the mix, because $8,700 just does not feel like a proper price tag for Strider considering his strikeout upside.
Yeah, complete mispricing there. I don't know how that happened. Like he was stuck in that price range for a while where it was just like, okay, cool, I guess we have to play Spencer Strider every day and not even think about it. And then they finally priced him up a bit. And now he's back. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing negative to say about him. He's ridiculously good. If I had to pick a negative, it would be that he walks 9% of hitters, but he still has a 28% K minus BB percentage because the strikeout percentage is so high. So yeah, he's kind of, I mean, I'm not going to say free square because there are other really good pitchers. You know, you mentioned McClanahan. Obviously, you have Nola on the other side of this game. You have Carlos Rodon. You have George Kirby at a similar price point, but kind of a free square at $8,700.
Yeah, relative to the price, he really should be much higher. And the strikeout rate, it's crazy because he kind of only has a plus fastball. The hitters know it's coming and they can't really do anything about it. But big slate, 13 games. There are a lot of spots to choose from. There are also some weather concerns. So we talked about this yesterday also in the morning where some potential weather concerns were in the mix. Nothing that was causing us early in the day to say like, oh, this is crazy concerning. But like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the MLB Deeper Dive and Live Before Lock where we really know which games are at risk. Because as of right now, there's a bunch of games with weather in the forecast, but it's nothing that I think as of right now we have to like, oh, this game is unplayable. So check back for that later. But is there anything to like about the offenses from the Braves or Phillies?
Not that I can think of. I mean, for Atlanta, obviously there's a lot of power in the lineup. I saw somebody in chat just now say get the Braves bats. They're gonna do well, whatever. Probably not, but like there is at least power there if you wanted to go to them. I think it's easier to make a case for Atlanta just based on talent than Philadelphia. But realistically, on a 13-game slate, I don't have any interest in targeting either one of Strider or Nola.
All right, so let's talk about more high upside pitching because the next game on the slate, the Tampa Bay Rays against the Baltimore Orioles, and it's Shane McClanahan on the mound for the Rays. And I think he's been the best pitcher in baseball for this season. 2.29 expected ERA, 35.7% K rate. He's gone up against some really good offenses, been in some tough matchups. The Orioles offense has certainly been better as of late than it was at the start of the year. But Shane McClanahan, I think that he's about as safe as pitchers come. If I was to build a cash game lineup right now on DraftKings, I would go with McClanahan and Strider as my two pitchers to roster. I think McClanahan, just a hard pitcher to get away from. I'm surprised that he's picking up so much less ownership than Aaron Nola. For me, I think that's a pretty good pivot to make, to be a little bit overweight to the field on Shane McClanahan, making him a good pivot off of Nola. But what do you make of McClanahan against your Orioles?
Looks absolutely fantastic. Just another ridiculously good pitcher. 35.7% strikeout percentage for him this year. 2 flat xFIP. We already talked about Strider leading the slate in strikeout percentage. Then you have McClanahan at 35.7%. The third highest is Carlos Rodon at 30.8. So you're just talking about a massive gap. Even though obviously Carlos Rodon's really good, he strikes out a ton of hitters. 30.8% is a great strikeout percentage. You're talking about a really big drop off from that Strider McClanahan pairing down to Carlos Rodon. McClanahan's been great. The only sort of negative, I guess, is that he is pitching in Baltimore instead of in Tampa Bay, but it's not supposed to be particularly warm in Baltimore today. It looks like it's supposed to be in the mid 70s, which probably means it'll feel like 100, but it's still fine. I mean, I think anybody that watches these shows knows that I like Baltimore's offense a bit, but McClanahan's just insanely good. I think that he's right up there with Strider as a top 2 pitcher on the slate.
And then starting for the Baltimore Orioles, we're totally on the same page with that, by the way. Starting for the Orioles, Spencer Watkins is going to be on the mound. He's had his struggles this year, doesn't really generate very many strikeouts, 13.6% K rate to go along with a 5.54 expected ERA. He's going up against a Rays team. It's a really watered down version of the Rays lineup. It seems like every few days now, there's a significant injury that comes out with the Rays. Wander Franco. Yesterday, we find out that Kevin Kiermaier is out for the season. Franco, who knows when he's going to be back at this point. So it's a little bit of a watered down version of the offense. You mentioned the weather not quite as hot now as it had been in previous days, but it's a pretty good matchup against Spencer Watkins. The Rays offense could be had for cheap. And with all the high end pitching for today, I do feel like I have to prioritize cheaper offenses a little bit more than normal because there's just so many high upside pitchers and high floor pitchers to get to at the top of the pricing range. So how are you going to look at the Rays offense today against Watkins? And the Rays are picking up a little bit of ownership.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky because, Watkins isn't very good. He has pitched better recently. I don't totally buy into it. Like, I don't think he's a particularly good pitcher, but like he's coming off of 4 consecutive good starts. And I'm not saying that in the sense that like, oh, you should look at the game logs and decide that Spencer Watkins is a really good pitcher. But 5, 6, 6 2/3, 5 innings, 0 earned runs, and then 1 apiece in each of his last 3 starts. I only mention it because Baltimore, we talked about it with Austin Voth yesterday. Baltimore does a really good job now. Like, they're one of the more analytically advanced teams in the league. So they are capable at least of grabbing somebody like Spencer Watkins, who has no discerning good qualities, and turning him into like a competent pitcher. But you're still talking about major league pitchers. Like, across an entire slate, Watkins is going to be one of the most obvious guys to target. And I think that you should be targeting him. But then the other problem is that Tampa Bay's lineup is kind of dog shit outside of like 4 guys. They're dealing with a lot of injuries, like you said. No Wander Franco, no Kevin Kiermaier, no Mike Sedino. But Diaz, Brandon Lau in particular looks great. Arozarena is going to look good. Choi's going to look good. And then you can just throw in, whatever fits out of Paredes and Walls and Lowe and whoever's in the lineup. But it's a nice park shift for Tampa Bay getting out of Tampa, even though, Baltimore now does have the massive wall, 1.5 million feet away in left field. You do have some left-handed power here with Lau and Choi. Rosarena offers some speed and power. So I do like Tampa Bay. They are getting ownership, like you said, 7% projected ownership, 4.5% chance of being the top stack. I think all of that just kind of makes sense to me. It's a pretty good spot against Watkins.
Yeah, and we'll see what the ownership ends up looking like later on the day. Right now, going to be fairly popular. Let's see, we've got them as the fifth most popular offense on this slate. So maybe a little bit too much ownership, but nothing totally crazy. It's 6.8%. But if you guys want access to all this information, sign up for a Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass. And if you're signing up for the first time, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters, because that's going to get you 50% off your first week of any weekly package. And you get access to all of the tools that I use to build my baseball lineups, the top stacks tool, where you find the percentage chance of each team being the top scoring team, top pitchers tool, find out the chance of each pitcher to be the top scoring pitcher. And then of course, player projections, ownership projections. We've got these kind of tools for basically every single DFS sport out there. And this package will have you covered on that. Just sign up using the promo code MLB Strategy Show to get 50% off your first week. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. So let's move on to the next game now. And that one is going to be the St. Louis Cardinals against the Toronto Blue Jays. And we have an interesting talking point in this game because the Cardinals are traveling to Toronto and their two best players are not vaccinated. So Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, both on the restricted list. They're not going to be available to play. Adam, you know I don't like Jose Barrios. He's had a terrible season. He's not one of my favorite pitchers. 5.3 expected ERA, 21.1% K rate. I know on paper the Cardinals present a fairly tough matchup and don't strike out a bunch, but this is a different scenario. There's no Arenado, there's no Goldschmidt, and Barrios right now is fairly low owned. We have him projected for 11% ownership at $7,900 over on DK. FanDuel, he's 8,900, only projected for 3% ownership. I think this is my favorite contrarian pitcher to get to, and I never roster pitchers against the Cardinals hardly. I hate rostering Barrios, but this kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's obviously a watered down lineup when you're not going to have Nolan Arenado or Paul Goldschmidt. It's still a decent lineup. I mean, Carlson, O'Neill, Gorman, Donovan, Edman, those guys are all good. Pujols is tough to strike out. Certainly not going to call him good, but tough to strike out. The bottom of the lineup's weak, but that's pretty normal. So it's not like it's a cakewalk matchup. It's not the Royals when they're missing their entire team, but it's still a better matchup than you would expect. It's a reasonable price tag on Barrios. And I mean, I've talked about him at length before where I understand he's had some bad starts. He's not having a very good year. I also don't believe that he's just like suddenly a horrible pitcher. All that being said, though, it's more of like a tournament play for me where, he's getting 11% ownership. I think that's pretty reasonable. There's there are several guys ahead of him that I prefer. But if you are trying to lose some ownership in your lineup, Barrios makes sense against a bit of a watered down St. Louis lineup.
Yeah, and the other thing too about this team is, even if this isn't going to be a team like a 24-25% K rate, I just don't know if there's enough firepower. And Barrios has shown this year that he could struggle in any spot, but he's also shown upside. Like he's been all over the place. There's been some individual high upside games for him. And if we're going to keep seeing this kind of modest ownership, which maybe it changes, because I remember we had a slate not all that dissimilar against the Kansas City Royals. So this was like you said, a more extreme example where Gausman wasn't projected for that much ownership in the morning, and then he did pick up more as the day went on. So I'll be curious to see where the ownership comes in with Barrios. But if he's going to be 11% owned when the other options around that ownership, it's like George Kirby at 11%, I'm going to lean towards Barrios. And there aren't that many cheap pitching options to like today. So 7,900 is an SP2. I could get behind Barrios as a good contrarian option. Cardinals offense, fair to assume not much interest there, even though Barrios has had his struggles.
Not too much. I do think it's worth mentioning that they are really inexpensive. Like you take Goldschmidt and Arenado out of that lineup, and now in their projected lineup, the most expensive hitter is Tommy Edman at 4K. They're still a solid lineup. Obviously not nearly as good without Goldschmidt and Arenado, but if you were to just stack like Carlson, O'Neill, Gorman, Donovan, Edman, those are still good hitters. That's a really cheap stack. You're facing a volatile pitcher in Barrios, and you're going to be able to play whatever pitchers you want, whatever one-offs you want. So I do think that there's some merit there, but it's certainly not a spot that I'm looking to like target aggressively. They only have a 3.5 implied run total. They're in Toronto, which it's still a good park to hit in, but you're getting out of the humidity in St. Louis, which typically plays pretty well this time of year. So I do think from a value standpoint, they're kind of interesting, but I don't anticipate getting to a ton of them on a 13-game slate.
And then what do you make of the Blue Jays offense in this spot? They're going up against Andre Palante, who we haven't seen all that much of at the big league level this year. 3.96 expected ERA, not terrible, 15.7% K rate. So the ball definitely gets put in play against him a lot. But then we have a really high implied team total for the Blue Jays, 5.6 runs, one of the highest marks on the slate. And they're kind of picking a modest ownership, only around 4.5% on FanDuel and DraftKings. We don't have them with massively high top stack odds, but I do think this is an upside spot for the Blue Jays just when you consider how high their team total is.
Yeah, I agree. Payante's been really good at getting ground balls so far. He has a 63.7% ground ball percentage with the Cardinals this year. And, you mentioned he doesn't strike out a lot of guys, but still a 3.74 xFIP. But I talk about it a lot. Like when you talk about a team like Toronto and you're facing an extreme ground ball pitcher like Payante that's going to let you put the ball in play, I still like getting to those teams just because the margin for error for those guys is relatively small. Yeah, a lot of times, you're just going to be frustrated because you're going to get a lot of ground outs to third and short and you're not going to score runs. But like if you're going to let Springer, Guerrero, Kirk, Bichette, Hernandez, like this whole lineup has so much power. If you're going to let them hit the ball, I like the upside that it offers. Most teams are going to fail anyway, whether it's ground balls or strikeouts or whatever. Hitting is really, really hard. I like taking my chances on a team that has a ton of power and is going to at least be allowed to hit the ball.
Yeah, and that is one thing also that I take note of is even though a pitcher like Pallante has had success, it's always going to be tough if you're allowing a whole bunch of contact and you're going up against a powerful offense. So I'm actually kind of curious what his matchups have been this year. I'm going to pull this up really quick because I wouldn't be surprised, especially considering the division he pitches in, if he's had some easier matchups where it's like, cool, he's letting the ball get put in play against him, but it's against the Reds or the Cubs, and it's not as big of a deal, which does kind of look like it's been the case. He's had a couple of tough matchups against the Phillies and the Braves, but then the Marlins, the Pirates, the Reds twice, the Cubs 3 times. So he has had a fairly easy strength of schedule, which is probably impacting his numbers a little bit there. So I think I'll be overweight to the field on the Blue Jays at 4.5% ownership, considering all the things we just talked about.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
All right, let's move on to the next one. Subway Series game, New York Mets against the New York Yankees. And two of the best teams in baseball. I find it hard to get behind a whole bunch in this game. The pitchers are Jordan Montgomery and Taijuan Walker. Each of them have been decent this year, but there isn't a ton of strikeout upside. 20.1% K rate actually for both pitchers in this spot. But then the offenses are both really good. Citi Field plays more towards a pitcher-friendly park. The team totals in this game fairly low, 4.2 for the Yankees, 4 for the Mets. So ultimately, I don't really love either of the pitchers, but I'm not sure the offenses have all that much upside either. There's just a lot of other spots I prefer getting to.
Yeah, pretty much agree with that. I mean, both teams with a 4 implied run total here. Both offenses are ones that I like getting to when they're relatively low owned. And right now we have the Yankees at 1% ownership. We have the Mets coming in at less than 1% ownership. But they're both pretty expensive as well. I have a lot of respect for Jordan Montgomery as a pitcher. He's not striking guys out at the same rate this year as he has in the past, but he's limiting right-handed hitters to a 138 expected ISO, 18% strikeout percentage against them, 31% strikeout percentage against lefties. On the other side, I'm a little more interested in the Yankees just because typically Taijuan Walker is really volatile, but he's also been really good at limiting power this year. 18% strikeout percentage against righties is lower than you would expect from Walker, but only a 126 expected ISO, 289 expected WOBA. Obviously, the Yankees are capable of just lighting up anybody, but Walker's been good at limiting power. The Yankees are expensive. You have a lot of pitchers you want to pay for. I think it's going to be kind of difficult to get to the Yankees, but if I happened to get there, it is the kind of slate where I always love the Yankees at 1% ownership, but I think from a roster construction standpoint, it's probably going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, especially because there's so many high-end pitchers we want to pay up for. It's just not a spot I see myself getting to a whole bunch. And that happens on a 13-game slate where we just ultimately can't get to every pitcher, can't get to every offense. And this game kind of looks like a write-off for me. Any interest in the Mets offense?
No. I mean, they're a good offense. So again, it's like, if you're playing 150 lineups and you get some unknown Mets, then sure, whatever. But between these two teams, I would prefer the Yankees just because they do have more power in their lineup. I have a hard time getting to either one of these teams, though.
All right, so let's move on to a spot kind of similar to yesterday and one that definitely kicked my ass. San Diego Padres against the Detroit Tigers. Mike Clevenger is not picking up a whole bunch of ownership against the Tigers. Last night, Sean Manaea. I know ultimately Manaea ended up being one of the more rostered pitchers on the slate, but it's not like he was crazy, crazy popular. Like I thought he was going to be a pitcher that when you and I talked about earlier in the day that he was going to end up being like crazy chalk. He ended up being like what, 28 or 29% owned in large field tournaments. So it wasn't anything that was like a crazy high number. And I think this could be a spot for Mike Clevenger as well at lower than expected ownership to do decently against the Tigers. The Tigers offense has been so bad against right-hand pitching this year. Clevenger's shown strikeout upside, 24.7% K rate. He's $8,100 on DK and only picking up 11% ownership. Over on FanDuel, Clevenger, $8,100, picking up 3% ownership. There aren't that many cheapish mid-range pitchers I like today, but Jose Barrios and Mike Clevenger are kind of the two that I have circled right now. Do you see this as a spot to go back to picking on the Tigers offense?
Yeah, I think Clevenger is really interesting here. I actually prefer him over Barrios, I think. Not by like a wide margin or anything, but 25% strikeout percentage facing the Tigers. This lineup is weaker than even the Cardinals' watered down lineup, I think. He's fully stretched out. There's no pitch count concerns really or anything like that. 8,100 for Clevenger, 3.98 xFIP this year to go along with that 25% strikeout percentage. We know there's a lot of strikeouts in the Tigers lineup. They're not a good hitting lineup overall. I like kind of the same thing I said about Barrios' ownership, where like I understand why it's only 11% because you have Spencer Strider, you have Rodon, you have Nola, you have McClanahan. Like you have four top tier pitchers on this slate. But also, 8,100 is a good price tag. If you're going to more expensive teams like the Yankees or like, other teams that we'll talk about, that's a good way to save salary and still keep plenty of upside in your lineup.
Yeah, and Clevenger, he's quietly been good this year. Like I don't remember any slates where he's been crazy popular. People really talked him up all that much. 3.61 expected ERA, 24.7% K rate. He's stretched out now. It's good results from him. I don't have any interest in the Tigers offense against him. I know they roughed up Shane McClanahan yesterday. I mean, not Sean Manaea. I don't know why I said McClanahan. I guess I was just looking at his name on the run sheet at the same time, but I don't think this is a good spot for the Tigers. And we also have to take note of this is a really bad offense against right-hand pitching, sub 70 WRC plus. So no interest in the Tigers offense. Fair to assume you feel the same way.
Yeah, and just for chat, because we see it all the time and it's happening a lot right now because the Tigers happen to have a good game yesterday. I don't know if they're like just trolling or what, but like there's a ton of variance in baseball. If you're going to look at what happened yesterday or 2 days ago or whatever, and like draw any sort of conclusion from it, you're going to be really, really bad at this for a really long time. The Tigers are a bad offense. They could have scored 140 runs yesterday. They would still be a bad offense today. Like it doesn't matter. So just in general, like stop looking at that shit.
Yeah, it's recency bias doesn't really mean all that much. And then there's stuff that happens in games too, where like, so Manaea might have pitched a lot better. There was a bad error that Eric Hosmer made, and then that meant Manaea had to pitch like a 36 pitch inning or something like that. I forget how many pitches he threw, and that just totally gassed him. And it got to the point too where Eric Haas hit a grand slam that kind of hit off Nomar Mazara's glove. It was ultimately the earned runs didn't count against Manaea because there was the error made earlier in the inning. And then you got stuff like when Greinke pitched yesterday, not to harp on this again, but Taylor Ward missed a grand slam by like 5 inches on a foul ball down the left.
By like 2 feet.
Yeah. So like a lot of weird things happen in baseball, and overall, just look at the numbers as a whole. Don't look at what happened last game or the last week or just individual matchups, because it's just not going to be a big enough sample size to tell you a lot of information. The Tigers have the worst offense in baseball against right-hand pitching. It's just a fact.
Yeah, I mean, like Josh had made the point the other day, and it was funny because he still got like clowned in chat the next day, even though he had gotten it completely right. It was when the Royals were playing their AAA team against Toronto in the first game, and we were talking about how great a matchup it was for Toronto, but he was like, the crazy thing with baseball is like the Royals still are going to win this game like 30% of the time. And then the Royals won, and chat's like, you said that they couldn't possibly win, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, I said 30%. But like, that's the thing is like, in baseball in particular, like there's so much variance. Like you can be the worst team in the league playing the best team in the league. You're still going to win 1 in 4 times or 1 in 3 times. You really can't draw conclusions from, what happened yesterday.
And somebody else made a good point. Did you see the bounce from on the Max Fried, the double he gave up?
No, I did not.
So there was a high chopper with, I want to say 2 outs and runners on second and third, and Scott was up for the Phillies. He hits a ball that he just kind of chops in front of the plate, and then just routine ground ball. It hits like a rock in front of Matt Olson, and it moves like, if you ever played backyard baseball, there was something called a crazy ball. It was like a power up, and all of a sudden the ball just starts spinning like crazy, and Matt Olson just had no chance to make a play on it. But it was just a routine ground ball. It took a crazy kind of bounce. Without that, Max Fried is the highest scoring pitcher on yesterday's slate, probably by a considerable margin, but that play happened and there was nothing he could have done about it. There was no skill involved in the play at any point. It was just a weak ground ball that hit a rock and something weird happened. But weird shit happens in baseball. There's a lot of variance over the course of 160.
Played backyard baseball and also played high school baseball on a field with a shitty infield. I can picture exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was. If you look it up after, it was an insane bounce. It made absolutely no sense. I've never seen a bounce like that before, but it happens. Starting at pitcher today for the Tigers, Garrett Hill is on the mound. His numbers not very impressive this year. 5.3 expected ERA, 12.3% K rate. We saw the Padres in a pretty good matchup yesterday against Drew Hutchison. They were not able to produce really anything on offense against him. Today, though, we do have them as one of the more positive leveraged offenses on the slate. 4% ownership, 6.5% top stack odds. I don't think Garrett Hill is particularly good. I think the Padres, both the offense and then also Clevenger as a pitcher, are too lower on spots to get overweight to.
Yeah, I'm with you. Only 4% aggregate ownership coming into the Padres right now. Manny Machado obviously is always going to look good. Very limited sample in the majors so far for Hill, but only a 15% strikeout percentage to lefties, 10% to righties, 173 expected ISO to righties, 206 to lefties. It's a pretty solid spot for San Diego. They're not getting a lot of ownership, as we mentioned, so I like getting there. Hill is like he was good at AAA this year, at least in terms of strikeout stuff. 4.4 xFIP, but did strike out 28.7% of hitters. But through his first 3 major league starts, that has not shown up. Certainly like the idea of getting to the Padres here.
All right, let's move on to the next game. And I was kind of stunned when I saw the total in this game. Red Sox and Guardians, 10.5 is the total in this game. The only game on the slate with a higher total is the game in Coors Field. And that one's only marginally higher than the Red Sox Guardians game. Brian Shaw, Josh Winkowski are the pitchers. Not that I think either of these guys are good, but I don't think they're the 2 worst pitchers on the slate either. So this total does look crazy high to me, but what does this make you think of the offenses where we've got Winkowski, for instance, 4.01 expected ERA, 16.3% K rate, but the Guardians, a 5 implied team total, and we've got 6 runs expected for the Red Sox against Brian Shaw. How much do you like the offenses in this game?
A decent amount. Winkowski's okay. He's not a great pitcher by any stretch. Only a 16% strikeout percentage, but 4.22 xFIP so far this year, allowing about 1 home run per 9 innings. But Ramirez always is going to look like a top third base option. Steven Kwan continues to be a good value leading off. Naylor's got power. Reyes is only 3,200. So there's some upside there. You have a cheap Nolan Jones, still just $2,300. So I think the Guardians look pretty good, but obviously Ramirez is the one really driving that. On the other side, though, it's kind of a tricky spot because you have a watered down Boston lineup. Maybe you get JD Martinez back today, but we know that they won't have Devers. They're not going to have Story. So it's a watered down lineup, but you're getting Brian Shaw opening, and he's expected to be followed by Kirk McCarty, who is making his 4th major league appearance at AAA this year. 12 games, 8 starts, 46 2/3 innings from McCarty, 5.11 xFIP, only striking out 18% of hitters. It sets up as a really good spot for Boston. But again, it's like, what hitters are you really confident in going to? Because this lineup has kind of turned bad really, really quickly. JD Martinez, if he's in the lineup at 4,700, I think looks really good. Xander Bogaerts looks good. Vasquez is expensive, but probably going to be in a good lineup position and a solid catcher option. Dahlbeck is really cheap. He was a cash option yesterday. I think he probably is again today. So I do like the matchup for Boston more than I like it for the Guardians. But overall, I think this is just a game that should have plenty of offense.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly what it looks like on paper. But I just want to ask you before we move on, what do you make of the Red Sox ownership? Because we do have them projected for nearly 15% ownership as a team on DraftKings, which that's really significant for a slate that has 13 games and a Coors Field game. Over on FanDuel, projected for 15% ownership. So by a pretty wide margin, this is the most popular team on the slate. Relative to ownership, is it a team you're going to roster with lower owned pitchers? Are you just going to be underweight to them as a whole? How do you handle them with so much ownership?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because they are good values and they project well. So you're going to get a lot of ownership there. I think that, that is a really good point. So they are probably going a bit overowned. And also, if you look individually, they're getting ownership really throughout their lineup. Cordero, Verdugo, and Vasquez all less than 10% owned, but Vasquez at the bottom, it's still 7%. Dahlbeck, Refsnyder, Downs, Duran, Martinez, Bogarts, all projected for double-digit ownership. So it's a team that if ownership holds how it is right now, I'm pretty likely to not get to the field on them. Like, I'll still play them just because they're good values, they're in a good spot, but likely to be mixing them into lineups a little bit more than full 5-man stacking them.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And there are going to be some kind of lower owned pitchers, like mentioned Clevenger, Berrios, ways to lower the ownership of some of the more popular offense a little bit. So those would be some good guys to mix in with the Red Sox bats. Let's move on to the next game here, Angels and Royals, and we get to talk about this terrible Angels offense again, but they're going up against a pitcher that we just don't have that much information on. Angel Zerpa is going to be on the mound for the Royals. Very limited data so far on him in the big leagues. 8.25 expected ERA, 7.4% K rate. Numbers that kind of look like Zach Greinke numbers, and that worked out for him last night. But what do you make of Zerpa, who has primarily spent time in Double-A this year? His Double-A numbers are not all that impressive. 4.36 ERA, 4.17 FIP, is generating some strikeouts down there at 24.8%. But what are you expecting from him tonight against this just terrible Angels lineup?
I mean, I'm expecting him to strike out 10 guys because he's facing the Angels. I don't know. He is kind of whatever. He's only made 2 major league appearances this year, 1 start. Like you said, most of his time at AAA, striking out 24.8% of hitters. Zips has him projected with a 17.8% strikeout percentage in the majors going forward. The bat has 18%. So, in the same range. He seems like a decent enough pitcher in terms of preventing runs, but and he's cheap and he's facing the Angels. So, if you need savings, he's fine, whatever. He threw 73 pitches last time out, went 5 innings. There's no ringing endorsement for him. I'm not looking at it and saying, oh, this guy is really good and he's really cheap and he's going to throw 100 pitches or anything like that. But if you need a cheap pitcher, you can still just stream pitchers against the Angels. He's no worse than Zach Greinke.
I've been wrestling with betting the under on his strikeout prop. It's not a high number, and it's definitely scary because I bet the under on Zach Greinke's strikeouts yesterday as well, and that was dead in the second inning. But Zerpa, his last start was in AAA, and he only pitched 1 inning. That was July 22nd. And then his last major league start was July 14th. So he's only pitched 1 inning in the last 2 weeks. I just don't know how deep he's going to go into the game. And then a 3.5 strikeout prop. I know this Angels team can't hit anybody, but I just don't know how deep Zerpa is going to work today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if they get 5 innings out of him, they'd probably be thrilled. I'm expecting that he's going to – so I'm expecting you're going to get – if he pitches well, you'll probably get, the 5 innings or 75-ish pitches. But I also do expect him to have a relatively short leash. So, that is something to keep in mind where, if he just runs into trouble in the 3rd or 4th inning, they're probably not going to give him the same sort of leash that they would. Actually, I don't know that they have a good starting pitcher, but that they would Brad Keller or something. Yeah, he's kind of just an in case of emergency pitcher for me here. He's decent at that price if you get a really good team around them. You pair him with, I don't know, McClanahan and the Yankees or something, and you just need a 6K or below pitcher, then sure. But I'm not going out of my way to get to him.
But one thing I will mention also when it comes to the Angels offense is, now I think rightfully so, the offense sucks on paper, but we're also only 2 days removed from them being the highest scoring team on a slate against Ian Anderson, who is a solid pitcher. Is there some upside in the Angels offense that's going to go overlooked just because of how much they sucked yesterday against Greinke?
And sucked every day before that also. Yes. I made the case yesterday that the Angels offense was kind of the same thing as Greinke, just the other side. People liked Greinke because he typically doesn't get strikeouts, but he's facing a team that strikes out a ton. And I made the case for the Angels where it's yeah, they strike out a ton, but they're also facing a pitcher that doesn't get strikeouts. What happens if they actually manage to put the ball in play, which obviously they didn't. but you do have power in this lineup. Ohtani obviously is really good. Ward's really good, but like Stassi has power for a catcher. Adele has power. He just can never hit the ball. So there is that case to be made where, they're facing a pitcher that doesn't project to have great strikeout stuff. Maybe Joe Adele accidentally hits a home run or two. I think you can make a case for the Angels, but also they really, really suck.
Yeah, they definitely suck. And on paper, although maybe Trout comes back today, but he's eligible to come off the injured list. We haven't had any kind of updates exactly when that's going to be, other than what are the Angels playing for at this point. It's funny. There's been all of these articles written about how should the Angels consider trading Shohei Ohtani. I would say no, just because I think he's so valuable from a marketing perspective. If I'm the Angels, I consider trading Mike Trout right now, though. There's a clear issue in terms of how often he's going to be on the field. They're not competitive right now. I assume he would still get a massive, massive haul in a trade. So that's somebody I would definitely consider playing trading if I was the Angels. But that aside,
yeah, it's a weird spot for I'm with you. If I'm trading one of Ohtani or Trout, I'm trading Trout. Just because, like you said, Ohtani has a bigger marketing pull. Like Trout has no interest in any of that. And then also, you're talking about a pitcher and an outfielder, but it's also just such a weird spot. Like, it's not like Trout's a really good player. Trout's still one of the best players in baseball, and best players ever. So like, it's just such a weird spot. Like guys like that aren't supposed to be on teams that are bad.
Yeah, and not only a team that's bad, a team that's very bad, and they've spent a lot of money to try to make the team better, but they're just always hurt. The pitching always sucks. Things always go wrong. So we'll see. But anyway, the bigger point here is let's see if Mike Trout is in the lineup or not, because that would also make a pretty big difference for how the Angels are just what their outlook is for the day. And Jose Suarez is going to be on the mound for Los Angeles, 4.76 expected ERA, 22.2% K rate. He's a solid but not great pitcher. I very rarely consider him for DFS purposes, so I don't think I'm going to roster him today, but I think he's good enough to where I don't have all that much interest in the Royals either.
Yeah, 6K. I mean, I don't think I'm going to need to get there. He's another one where, like, if you do need the punt pitcher, you can certainly take a shot on him. 20.5% strikeout percentage, 4.91 xFIP. Obviously not that great. Kansas City may or may not have Bobby Witt today. He left early on Sunday. He didn't play yesterday. If he's out, obviously that lineup is a little bit weaker. But yeah, Kansas City, it's not a spot that I really like. It's not a great hitter's park. It's a bad hitter's park. It's not supposed to be particularly warm there. They are a team that I seem to just like sort of always get to because Whit Merrifield is typically one of your better second base options. Bobby Witt is always one of your better shortstop options. So maybe those guys in particular I get to as one-offs, but overall I have a hard time getting to the Royals, and I don't really have much interest in Suarez either.
All right, so let's move on to the next game. But first, shout out to our sponsor, Prize Picks. They are sponsoring today's show, and we've got a great deal with them because if you sign up right now using the promo code AWESEMO, they're going to give you up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. And then we've also got a lot of tools over at Stokastic.com, especially over on OddShop, where you can just see the projected odds of individual props to win. So you start yourself off with $100 for free when you sign up using that promo code AWESEMO, and then use some of our tools to turn that $100 to even more money. So go check that out. Go check out Prize Picks and all the tools we have on the site to help you build some winning player prop cards over there. Next game to hit on, Brewers, Twins. Ethan Small on the mound for Milwaukee. And what do you know about this guy? Because another one, young pitching prospect who we have very limited sample size on as far as major leagues go. I do think he's a much better outlook than somebody like Zerpa, just because we've seen so much strikeout upside from him in the minor leagues. So this year in AAA for Small, he does have a 26.4% K rate, 3.34 ERA. Down in AAA the year before, his strikeout numbers weren't quite as good, but he did do a good job of limiting runs against him. So the projections for him from both Zips and Steamer are not terrible. And actually, Zips does have him projected as a decent strikeout guy going forward. So what do you make of this matchup for Small against the Twins?
I mean, I think it's a scary matchup. We know that the Twins have a lot of power in their lineup, but from a talent standpoint, I think Small is the guy that you probably go to first if you're paying down a pitcher. He's not getting much ownership here either, which kind of just tells me that you don't typically need to go cheap at pitcher. But that's one thing I take away from the ownership projections in the morning is if it was a slate where like hitter pricing was really, really expensive or something, you would just see more ownership in general going to these cheap pitchers. And the fact that they're all like 1% owned tells me that you probably don't need to. But if you were going to, 5,300 for Small, I think is just cheaper than his talent level indicates. He's actually older than I realized. He's 25. I thought he was younger, but does have good strikeout stuff. 26.7 or 26.4% at AAA this year. Like you said, Zips projects him for about 23%. So I think he's underpriced in terms of talent, but it is also a dangerous matchup against Minnesota, and also doesn't seem like you need to go that cheap on this slate.
Yeah, and this is another one of those spots. And we've got Dylan Bundy on the mound for Minnesota, 3.79 ERA, 17.7% K rate. I don't really see myself getting to the offenses nor the pitchers a whole ton in this spot. I just think there's better places to get our exposure to across the board. But the matchup for the Brewers against Dylan Bundy, is this a pitcher you're looking to attack?
Um, Kind of. So for, I mean, really both offenses I think are kind of interesting. Going up against Bundy, like he doesn't strike guys out anymore. He still gives up power, 1.23 home runs per nine, 4.32 xFIP. He's facing a Milwaukee team that does have plenty of power. They're not super cheap at the top of the order, but you can get to some cheap bats towards the bottom to kind of balance it out. Narvaez at 3,200, Urias at 3,500. So I think that Milwaukee looks pretty good here. And then on the other side, I mentioned Small having good strikeout stuff, but you're also talking about a pitcher that has virtually no major league experience going up against Buxton, Correa, Polanco, guys that have a lot of power here. So I do like the offenses in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're unplayable, just not necessarily priorities for me. We've got Milwaukee right now projected for 4.6% ownership. Minnesota, probably a little bit more tenable for me, 3.9% ownership, 5.2% top stack odds. So yeah, maybe I should run that back a little bit. Not necessarily write-off offenses for me, just not the highest priority offenses on the slate.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I do think like we haven't really talked about offenses that we really love yet, and obviously we're going to get to some of them, but I do think that both of these offenses are relatively low owned here and do have pretty high ceilings.
All right. Well, there's a chance we might like offenses in the next game. It is a Coors Field game. So we've got a pretty high total in this game, highest on the slate, 11 and a half runs. Pitching matchup isn't bad. Michael Kopech for the White Sox, Herman Marquez for the Rockies. Kopech has had his struggles this year. Overall, his numbers aren't awful, but it's a Coors Field game. The Rockies are only projected for 4% ownership. We've got the White Sox. They're projected to be somewhat popular here, 12% ownership. It's a Coors Field game. I don't really think that's all that crazy. So for me, these are two offenses that I'm looking to get to on this slate. The Rockies in particular, if we're going to be getting a Rockies team at really low ownership against a pitcher in Michael Kopech, who does have all the arm talent in the world, but he's so inconsistent. He's been all over the place this year. And I think there's a pretty good chance that he could get hit hard here in Colorado. So if people are really not going to play the Rockies because they're going up against Michael Kopech, I think this is my favorite offense on the slate to get to.
Yeah, I think they look really good here. And one other thing to mention, and I kind of alluded to it in the last game, we haven't run into a lot of offenses that we really like on this slate. There's not a ton of really bad pitching today. So like it would be a little bit different. I would still like the Rockies at low ownership in Coors Field, like I always do, but if this were a slate where like the Braves were facing some garbage pitcher and the Yankees were in a great spot and the Blue Jays were in a great spot, then there is at least like more opportunity cost to going to a shitty Rockies offense against Michael Kopech, who, like you said, he hasn't been great this year. 5.04 xFIP, walking 12% of hitters, only striking out 21.5% of hitters, which is absurdly low given how good his stuff is. But if you had like all of these other good offenses in good spots, then it would be a little bit more difficult to make a case for the Rockies outside of just saying, they're in Coors Field. But we haven't really liked many offenses so far. So that makes me even more interested in the Rockies because I don't feel like I'm giving up a lot. I'm getting to a team in Coors at low ownership against at this point, mediocre pitcher in Michael Kopech. So, yeah, I'm with you. I like the Rockies.
Yeah. And then what do you make of the White Sox on the other side? They are going to be fairly popular. Like I said, 12% ownership, but it does seem warranted because we have them with the highest top stack odds on the slate by a somewhat decent margin, 11% top stack odds, when there isn't a single other team over 8%. So the White Sox are going to be popular, but it more or less looks appropriate to me. I think this is still a team to get to even at the high ownership.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not like the ownership is crazy. It's a 13-game slate. Tim Anderson is leading the way at 16.5% ownership. So, and four guys in the projected lineup are sub 10% in Jimenez, Sheets, Harrison, and Engel. Not the best guy, not the best hitters. Jimenez has really struggled this year, but he at least has a pedigree as a really good hitter. The other three are not great hitters, but they're also inexpensive. They're not popular. I think you can get to the White Sox pretty easily here, and it won't be that difficult to offset the ownership.
Yeah, and that is one thing that's a big benefit of a 13-game slate. And I think you did bring up a good point just in the last game we were talking about, that we haven't really talked about that many offenses we really like today. And then just by coincidence, the next game happened to be the Coors Field game. Whenever we get a Coors Field game with modest ownership, that's where to attack it. The spots I don't like Coors Field, funny enough, is when there's a shitty pitcher pitching, because then you get like 30, 35% ownership for teams on the aggregate. It's kind of the decent, but not like Cy Young caliber pitchers that I really do like to pick on at Coors Field. So I imagine the White Sox and the Rockies are going to be the two offense I get the most exposure to today.
Yeah, I like Coors Field slates where people aren't playing Coors Field. I like them before the slate starts, and then Coors Field ends up being 3-2, and I lose all my money. But yeah, the way it looks right now, I think I'm getting to both sides of this game.
All right, few games left to talk about. We're moving into the West Coast games now, and now it is the Houston Astros against the Oakland A's. Frankie Montas on the mound for Oakland, and overall he has really good numbers for the year: 3.58 expected ERA, 26.3% K rate, but he was coming off a layoff in his last start and only worked 3 innings. Realistically, how deep do we think Montas is going in the game today, and how is that going to impact the Astros offense?
So I'm pulling that up now. 53 pitches last start. It makes me think that you're probably getting like, I don't know, 70-ish. Yeah, he said he felt only normal soreness in his shoulder after that start. The DraftKings blurb says that Oakland's manager said that he should be ready to go today. I assume that he's throwing like, I don't know, not enough pitches for me to want to roster him at 9,600, but also still doesn't make Houston look that good, because if we assume Montas is going to go like 4 or 5 innings, like he's a really good pitcher. The park sucks for hitting. To me, Houston just looks like one of those teams where like you're never wrong for playing Houston. They're really, really good, but there's nothing I can point to that like makes Houston look good here.
Yeah, and if this was going to be another spot where we're going to get like 3 innings out of Montas, I would say maybe we could look at Houston then as really being a contrarian team. But if we're going to be getting 5 innings of Montas, he's been good enough to where I'm not really looking to stack the Astros here in Oakland. But on the other side of the game, Luis Garcia, really solid results this year: 3.38 expected ERA, 26.6% K rate. I know you've pointed out a few times over the course of the year, he's not typically a pitcher that is a long leash and works crazy deep into games, but he's going up against the Oakland A's. They don't have a good offense. They have the lowest implied team total of the entire slate, just barely over 3 runs. How do you like Luis Garcia when he's another guy that's not going to be crazy popular today? Projected for 26% ownership on DK, so a little bit below some of the other high-end starters, 11% on FanDuel. Where does he fit in the mix for you amongst the real aces on the slate?
He looks good to me. It makes sense that he's getting that ownership. I do think that he's, a tier below Nola, McClanahan, Rodon, Strider, just in terms of everything. But it is a good matchup. It's obviously a good park to pitch in. He's got a 26% strikeout percentage this year, 3.58 xFIP. He's a good pitcher. The biggest issue, one, he doesn't have the same strikeout stuff that other guys on this particular slate have. But like you said, he's thrown more than 100 pitches once in his last 10 starts. And that's not a huge deal, because typically pitchers, do get less effective the third time through the order. A lot of times, you'll see kind of like what happened to Shohei Ohtani the other day, where, they're pitching really well and then they push them out there for that final inning and suddenly they lose 5 points or 10 points or whatever it was. But from an upside standpoint, it is something to keep in mind, especially on a slate like this, where you do have legitimate, massive strikeout guys that also are probably going to have longer leashes than Garcia. It does matter a little bit there. But that being said, 9,100, certainly a reasonable price tag on him. I don't have any issue with getting to him when I'm in that price range.
Yeah, and looking at Luis Garcia also against the A's, it's a really high floor spot. And that, I think, does have some utility as well. He's going to be picking up, what is he at right now? 26% ownership over on DK. Maybe I come in a little bit underweight to the number, but still, I think he's a pitcher to consider just because of how good the matchup is. And I have no interest at all in the Oakland A's offense today.
Yeah, that's kind of evergreen material, having no interest in the A's offense.
Yeah, more or less. I think I can't remember actually the last time I really aggressively stacked A's on a full size slate. Like if they're on a 2 or 3 game slate, whatever, it's kind of unavoidable. But slate of this size, no thank you. Next game we have to talk about San Francisco Giants, Arizona Diamondbacks, and Carlos Rodon, another high upside pitcher. 30.8% K rate for him, 2.93 expected ERA. It's funny because 30.8% is such a high K rate, and it's still nowhere near the tops on this slate because you got pitchers like McClanahan and Strider that are just miles above Carlos Rodon. I kind of have to consider Strider and McClanahan as just being better options on the slate. So Rodon is certainly in play, but he's just not a priority for me like he is on many other slates.
Yeah, he's kind of, I mean, he's still obviously a really, really good play. 9,800 is too cheap for Carlos Rodon, but 10-3 is too cheap for McClanahan. 8,700 is certainly too cheap for Strider. 26% ownership, certainly reasonable. The Diamondbacks are a below average offense. You're getting not San Francisco, but still a solid pitcher's park with the roof closed in Arizona. 30.8% strikeout percentage for Rodon is third highest on the slate behind Strider and McClanahan. So he looks really good. He's just not quite those other two.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at too. We've got a lot of high-end pitchers to choose from. And then even somebody like Luis Garcia, who I think I might prefer to Carlos Rodon today. And
Really? Why?
Well, for one, the implied team total for the A's is more than half a run lower than what it is for the Diamondbacks. And then it's just the Oakland A's. It's a more favorable pitcher's ballpark also being played in Oakland. Luis Garcia, let's see, who do we have right now with... there's also a $700 salary savings on Luis Garcia compared to Rodon. Over on FanDuel, then it's $1,300 difference. So, I mean, if we're looking at the guys in Rodon's price tag, so he's 9,800, it's still comparable to guys like Nola, McClanahan. And then I think the salary savings I get from Luis Garcia and the better matchup is probably going to sway me a little bit. That, and at least for our projections, there isn't that much of a gap between them.
Yeah. I don't think there's a massive gap. I just prefer Rodon. Better strikeout stuff, longer leash. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like crazy. I don't think there's a huge gap between them. If I can get to Rodon, I'd rather get there.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think I'm going to be underweight to both of them, though, and prioritize getting to Strider and McClanahan. But in terms of secondary pitching options, I guess I'd put like Rodon and Luis Garcia in the same group as being like tier 2 of the pitching options today, whereas tier 1 is going to be Strider, McClanahan. Nola probably in tier 2 also, even though I think he's in a really good spot just because I think he's a little bit too popular.
I'll say the craziest thing to me here is that Aaron Nola is getting the most ownership.
Yeah, I totally agree. When we talk about all these pitching options on the slate, and Nola, who not only is picking up all this ownership, but he also he's going up against the Braves, where it's like McClanahan's against the Orioles, Rodon's against.
Hey, we don't do Orioles slander on this show.
It's not slander. I just think the Braves are better.
Yeah, that's a fair take.
And so we've got McClanahan against the Orioles. We've got Rodon against the Diamondbacks, Luis Garcia against the A's. Like, these are considerably easier matchups than what Nola has. And Nola nearly 40% owned on a 13-game slate. Just seems a little wild to me, but we'll see. That's one of those ones that I certainly think could change when we get closer to the deeper dive and live before lock. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check all that out later. One of the weirder things that happened on yesterday's slate is Tyler Gilbert getting scratched, but just starting today instead. And then Merrill Kelly starting yesterday. But Gilbert, all the same things apply today. He still sucks. 6.76 expected ERA, 14% K rate. The Giants are a team that going to be somewhat popular today. They are actually picking up the third most ownership behind the Red Sox and the White Sox. How do you like the Giants today going up against Tyler Gilbert, a spot where it looks like they're oddly picking up more ownership on a 13-game slate than they did on a smaller slate yesterday?
Yeah, I wish this team would just stop being on slates because it's like such a difficult spot to talk about. Tyler Gilbert's bad. The Giants have good hitters. If this game is close in like the 5th, 6th inning, you're going to lose Austin Slater. You're going to lose Darren Ruff. You may lose Mercedes because you're just going to have Jack Peterson and Lamont Wade and these guys pinch hitting. But then also they're really cheap. Like we have the Giants right now, not only with a 6.5% chance of being the top stack, but a 13% chance of being the top value stack, which is number 1 on the slate. So you're going to be able to build lineups that like project really well with the Giants. They're still in good spots. You know, Ruff and Slater are still going to get at least a few at bats, and you know it is factored into their projections. So I like the Giants here. It's just difficult to. There's just like a lot. There's just even more variance than normal with the Giants because like not only do you need your offense to hit, which is difficult and typically is not going to happen, but then you like need them to not get pinch hit for in the 6th, get that extra at bat, maybe a pinch hit for in the 8th and you only lose one at bat. You're talking about guys like Ruff and Slater. So it's a really tough spot. Flores individually, I think looks really good because he's somebody that they're going to let hit against right-handed pitching as well. So he doesn't have the same pitch hit risk as these other guys.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that's really annoying when it comes to the Giants is like, hey, I've got a good stack going, and then all the players are out of the game in the 5th inning, and it's, well, go fuck me, because now none of my players are going to be getting fantasy points. But there is certainly a lot of upside in a pitcher going up against a pitcher like Tyler Gilbert, who's just straight up been trash this year. A couple games left to talk about. Next one, Los Angeles Dodgers at home against the Washington Nationals, and the Dodgers have a massively high team total on the slate, nearly 6 runs going up against Josiah Gray. Gray's numbers aren't bad this year. Actually, formerly a Dodgers prospect, he was the number 1 guy who went to the Nationals in the trade for Trey Turner and Max Scherzer. Gray this year, 4.33 expected ERA, 27% K rate, but still books strongly preferring the Dodgers in this spot with, like I said, the nearly 6 implied team total. And then we've also got the Dodgers not picking up all that much ownership today, 5%. This is a really high upside offense. I know they're expensive, so it comes with the opportunity cost of we can't just jam the most expensive pitchers on the slate with the Dodgers. But I think this is a team that warrants more than 5% ownership.
I'm super distracted by King of Smack in chat right now, just saying random shit. But yeah, I mean, the Dodgers, trying to get back on track. Sorry. But yeah, Josiah Gray gives up a lot of power. He's got decent strikeout stuff. Actually has the 6th or 5th highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 27%, but more than 2 home runs per 9, 4.18 xFIP, very, very high upside spot for the Dodgers. They are not projected for a ton of ownership here either.
Yeah, this is one of the teams where I think we could pay up to be contrarian, and you're just going to put yourself on really different pitcher builds because all of the pitchers that are popular on the slate are expensive. We don't have a single pitcher who's picking up a decent amount of ownership priced below Spencer Strider on DK. Then if you look over at the FanDuel ownership, the cheapest pitcher also that's picking up any ownership is Spencer Strider at 9,100. So if you're getting a little bit cheaper at pitching and going to like Mike Clevenger and Jose Barrios to pay up for an offense like the Dodgers, I think you're giving yourself a lot of upside and you're just going to be making a build, but the field isn't going to be on. So I like the Dodgers as a pay up to be contrarian spot. There aren't that many teams that I think we could look at this way because like the Yankees, lower ownership, but I don't really love the matchup. I think there's legitimate upside here in the Dodgers and it makes sense to me. Pitching for them is going to be Mitch White. I don't really like rostering Mitch White, and I don't really see that much reason to stack the Nationals against him either.
Yeah, same boat. I just kind of don't see a huge need for Mitch White on this slate. He's a solid enough pitcher, but 18.6% strikeout percentage, 4.6 xFIP so far this year. Nats are a tough strikeout matchup. There's just plenty of pitchers that are like $400 or $500 more that I would rather get to. But that being said, still a below average offense for Washington. Juan Soto, certainly always good, but not very interested overall in the Nats. And also your weekly reminder that Luis Garcia are playing. So leave yourself a little bit of extra time if you're using an optimizer because it's going to screw up.
How fast was your fastball in high school, Adam? Because I think this could be something, because who knows, right? Because I know King of Spac used to throw 85 miles per hour. What do you think is the hardest you could throw?
I could throw in the 80s. I didn't. Slider, curveball. I basically pitched like I was left-handed, even though I'm right-handed. I didn't throw 85, but also, was not the highest ranked prospect in Mississippi like he was.
Yeah, no. Adam was the 6th ranked prospect regionally in the greater Baltimore area. It's whatever. It's nothing to sneeze at, but it's when's the last time you actually tried to throw a baseball?
Actually probably when I threw the first pitch at the Orioles game like 3 years ago.
So for me, it was at the live final, the baseball live final in Denver, which was like 2.5 years ago. And I'm almost positive that I partially tore my UCL doing it. When I went
to it was either a Nats game or an Orioles game recently. They had the, thing set up with like the radar gun and I saw it. And like, there was the part of me that was like, oh, I want to go do that. And then the other part of me thought about like, every time I throw a tennis ball for my dog, and I'm pretty sure I tear something in my shoulder, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going over there.
Yeah, so I hadn't thrown a baseball, and because who throws a baseball anymore? It was probably I probably hadn't thrown a baseball since like college or high school or something like that. So I'm like, yeah, I want to do it. So I just kind of stretch a little bit, swing my arm around, do like a crow hop and throw as hard as I can. And immediately my hand kind of started to feel tingly. And the next day I woke up and my whole arm from like the wrist to my fingertips was just swollen. And whenever I'm working out, lifting weights now, or like doing push-ups, my elbow clicks now. So listen, I'm impressed that you're able to throw 85 miles per hour and you were formerly a top prospect in the Mississippi region there, King of Smack. Not for me though. I spend my time watching baseball because I know where my strengths are, and there's utility to that. I could win at DFS because I don't play baseball. I don't have time for that. I gotta watch the game film. We got to do our 80 hours of tape study a week. Don't have time to do that from working on my fastball. But only one game left to talk about on today's slate: Seattle Mariners against the Texas Rangers. And George Kirby's going to the mound for Seattle. He's one of my favorite young pitching prospects in baseball. And there's been times where he's been popular this year. There's been times where I've rostered him. I don't really know that this is the slate, though. He's projected for some ownership, 3.79 expected ERA, 22.6% K rate. And there's just other pitchers around here I like a little bit more than him. I'd rather roster Jose Barrios. I'd rather roster Mike Clevenger. And they're also both cheaper than George Kirby. So I'm not really quite sure where he's going to fit in the mix for me. But could you sell me on George Kirby at all?
I think I'm a little bit higher than you. Just, obviously I agree with the points you made. There's other guys to get to in that price range. He is a little bit more expensive than somebody like Barrios or Clevenger, but he's also still a really good pitcher in a really good pitcher's park as well. Only walking 3% of hitters this year, 22.5% strikeout percentage, 3.44 xFIP, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. I think that ownership on him is fine. I think I do slightly prefer him to Barrios if I can find the money. Him and Clevenger, I think, are the two that I like the most in that price range.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there for sure. And I'm not looking to stack against George Kirby. The Rangers have a fairly low implied team total, but I do really like the stuff of George Kirby. He's had a couple of individual spots where he's really gotten blown up. I'm sure that we all remember the time that he was an uber chalk option was a smaller slate against the Orioles and absolutely got his ass kicked. The Orioles lit him up in that start and won GPPs as a contrarian play. But I'm not really looking to get to Texas in this spot. And then we've got Dane Dunning on the mound for the Rangers. Very mediocre, 4.51 expected ERA, 19.9% K rate. He also is a pitcher that typically doesn't have a crazy long leash. Mariners offense, I'm curious to see what happens with Julio Rodriguez. Hasn't been put on the injured list, at least not officially, but it does seem like a potential possibility. What do you make of the matchup, Dane Dunning going up against Seattle?
It's an okay matchup for him, but I just, it's a good park too, but I don't really see a need to be getting to Dunning on this particular slate. I think he's a solid real life pitcher, 4.05 xFIP, about a 20% strikeout percentage, but just plenty of other pitching that I expect to get to ahead of him.
All right, that is going to do it for us today, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the content we have later on the day, deeper dive, live before lock. And don't forget, if you're signing up for a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership for the first time, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. It's going to get you 50% off your first week. And you get access to all the tools that we talk about on the shows and also help us build winning MLB lineups. And it also has you covered for pretty much every single other DFS sport out there. But other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. One more time, like the video and subscribe. Good luck, and I'll see you guys later.